Hello, my friends. Thanks once again for joining us on this Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. This is Spiritism, a closer look, our weekly program on Kardec Radio. I'm Luiz Lima, your host for tonight. And tonight we have a topic which is losses. How do we deal with that? How do we cope with that? So these are some of the things we're going to go through tonight. And it's a pretty extensive subject, but we are gonna narrow down to just a few things. Of course, we can do lots of other programs about losses extending the subject, but for now, let's just concentrate on a few things, and I'll tell you what they are. In general, we experience all types of losses, and they're not only losses in the sense that a family member that passed away or anything like this. No, there are material possessions, for example, something that might be just valuable to you and you lost it for some reason, an object that just broke or it was stolen, whatever it was, but it had a value to you somehow. Something related to a monetary value, like a car, a house. If you lose a car, if you lose a house for whatever reason, a job, you can lose a job, and events of opportunities that only happen once in life. For example, first day of your child in school, child's graduation, sister or brother wedding, for example. These are things that if you miss them, that's it. You just missed them. It's not going to happen again. Now, other types of losses include relationships, for example. You're in a relationship, and for some reason that dismantles, if you will, and that's a loss right there. You have to cope with that. But the big one is death, and it's not only death of a family member, a relative, or a spouse, child, father, mother. No, it could be, for example, a doctor, or even better, a surgeon that loses a patient during an operation, a surgery. That's a loss. He has to deal with this. He's human, so they have to deal with that. Loss of a pet, death of a pet. You know, we get attached to our pets. We love them, and if they're gone, we have to deal with that. So there's a lot of different things. There's a lot of different types of losses, and each one of them requires a different method or perspective on how we're going to deal with that. For example, material possessions. If we lose something, there are ways around to recover it, or you can buy them again. You can make efforts towards replacing them somehow. That's one way of doing it. Now, in death, that's completely impossible. You cannot talk about a recovery in the physical sense of those you lost. They will not gonna come back. So the way we cope with this is different than material losses, and that's the worst type, loss of a loved one. One interesting Hollywood movie came out in, I think, 2007. It came from a book. It's called The Shack, and most people have seen it. If you haven't, I really encourage you to look at it, to watch the movie The Shack. And we're not going to talk about the movie itself. We're not going to tell the story of the movie, but it has to do with how to cope with the loss of a child and rebelling against God. That's the general tone of the movie. So this guy has to deal with the loss of a loved one that he cannot accept, he does not understand. And that kind of thing intersects with divine justice, which we do not understand fully. And it's a very interesting movie. He feels like we do when we lose a family member, for example, a relative, a close one, a loved one. We feel completely underpowered. There's absolutely nothing we can do to stop death, or even worse, revert. Nothing. So when we do not cope well with that, And it's a learning process. So if we have not yet learned how to cope with that, our tendency is to dethrone God, just dethrone this, have questions and revolt and go into a state of rebellion. It's not going to help anything. It doesn't help. It's a matter of learning how to do with this. We should seek to understand God's law instead of dethroning God. If we, or every time, and this is fragmented, it happens at times in our lives when we revolt against God. Every time we do this, we disconnect from the very source of happiness. So we can't be happy in situations like this if we allow that disconnection to take place, if we allow that tie to be cut. It's going to make it more complicated for us. We are the ones who are going to suffer more. So everyone copes with losses to the extent that they can. And it's not the same for everyone. And this is very well explained in Spiritism. If we go back to the Spirit Scale, we've done 2 or 3 programs about it. If we go back to Spirit Scale, which is a classification in orders of spirits according to their level of evolution, intellectual and moral evolution. So the ones in the bottom of the scale, meaning the less evolved ones, the third order, it's called third order spirits or imperfect spirits. For those, material life takes precedence over spiritual life. For spirits like this, third order spirits, and that's what us on planet Earth, the great, great, great majority are. We are third order spirits, essentially. For us, when something like this happens, a loss of a death of a loved one, we absolutely demand the physical presence of that one person. We want that person back, just the way it was, before they passed away. For second order spirits, in which spiritual life takes precedence over material life, that doesn't happen. They don't suffer as we do when a loved one passes. They have a different understanding. They are at least one layer above us. And the higher you go in the spirit scale, the less of a material life they want to live. They are centered and focused on living a more spiritual life. So second order spirits view losses like this as being about the body only, not the essence. The essence or the spirit of those who passed can and will be survived with memories and thoughts by us. We can bring them back anytime. Just think of them. Just bring up some memories of the time they were with us here. So you see, that spot of love that survives and transcends death. We still love that person the same way. We just cannot physically touch them or see them. But love transcends death. So this creates for us, because we are at the lower part of the scale, because we are third order spirits living more of a material life, way more than a spiritual life, that creates a conflict. Because that loved one that passed, that person is absent, but still present in our hearts. So they're absent from the material life, from things around us. They're not around anymore, physically speaking, but they are still in my heart. So how come? It's a conflict for third order spirits because of the attachment to material things. So we just want the part that is the physical part of that person. And that part will ever be absent. And we want things this way because we are still very much attached to a material life. Now, on the other hand, if you think about those who passed, it is necessary for them those we lost, to go through the process for their own spiritual growth. It is part of their spiritual growth. It has to happen. So, losing someone to death, of course, is not an easy thing. Nobody likes it. But it can be less troublesome if we allow ourselves to understand what this means. And that's what Spiritism is very good about. It will let us see the process from the other side as if we were one of the discarnates. And how can we do this? First of all, by learning in Spiritism, we will be receiving. That's what the codification is all about, receiving information from those who are on the other side. If you think about death as a portal, a physical, think about a physical portal that you go through, or a tunnel. Just think about a tunnel. For those going into the tunnel, the ones left behind, we see that one way. For those waiting on the other side of the tunnel, receiving the person back in, they see in a completely different way. Their description is completely different than ours. So if we, or when we understand things from the other side of life, we change our perspective, it will be, things like this will be easier on us. It's never going to be easy, but it will be less of a complicated situation like we do face today. Now, just as a side note, death is not the only thing that takes loved ones away from us. I'm going to say that again. Death is not the only thing that takes loved ones again away from us. For example, drugs, all types of drugs, from alcohol to the worst, ecstasy, whatever you want to think of. They might take away from us those as we knew them. These people on drugs, when they get into drugs and they just leave life behind, life as we know it, they might display and live a completely different personality, that to a point that we are going to look at the situation and say, that's not the same person. It's not the same one anymore. So for us, that has a sentiment of a loss, especially parents and children. Children that get into drugs and they really, go away from everything. They turn their life around for worse. Parents look at that and they have the exact sensation that they lost their kid, just as if the kid had died. Sometimes they don't even, never ever again show up in the parent's life. They completely separate themselves. That's a type of, it's a big loss. And there's another type of big loss like that, which is when a loved one is abducted by obsessors. Obsessors are discarnate spirits that will work towards doing evil to people, to incarnates. And at times they can steal, if you will, completely the personality of the loved one, to the same extent that the drugs do. The person becomes a different personality. They live a different life, a different personality. We look at them and say, I don't recognize you anymore. That's complicated for those family members and people around looking at that. Very difficult. However, for those left here, for those who are friends, family, relatives, and so, that will kind of create in us the sense of being this missionary that will do everything and everything possible to get the loved one back. We will fight fiercely to get them back, to pull them back in life away from the obsessors. Of course, we will be attacked and violated constantly, but we won't let the obsessor win and take these people, these loved ones away from us. We will do everything. It becomes a mission, a life project as of that point. It is a loss, yes. It's horrible, it's awful, but it's a kind of loss. And we have to learn how to deal with that because it does happen. And it can happen to anyone, any family, any group of people. I talked about the movie The Shack in the beginning, which, again, I really encourage you to watch that movie. And I'm going to recommend another one. It's called Flatliners. Flatliners originally was uh, from 1990. It has big name artists today. They were in the very beginning of their journey as actors and actresses. Julia Roberts, Kevin Bacon, Kiefer Sutherland. It's a great team. But they were young, starting their careers. Flatliners, 1990. It's about transitioning from life to death, what it means. I'm not going to say anything about the movie. Anything I say is going to spoil the movie. Yeah, it spoil your experience in watching or trying to watch the movie. But it all starts in a hospital when one of the doctors loses a patient, and she has to deal with that. That's how the whole thing starts. Watch that, The Flatliners. There's a remake in 2017, I believe it is. But the focus of the movie in 2017 is not the same as the focus of the movie in 1990. So watch the original. It's incredible. For us spiritists, watching that movie is another experience. So go ahead and do it. Watch it. Anyhow, so talking about death and losses, right? Death for science doesn't mean the same thing that is for spiritists or even spiritualists. Death for science is a ending of something. We're not going to get into that because that's not the subject today. But death for science is the end of something, end of life. For us, it's not. It's just a point of reference. Point of reference, the transitional point for us. And that in itself makes us spiritists to have a completely different view of losing a loved one from someone who is materialistic. Completely different. So how do we spiritists cope with losing loved ones? Well, let me say this. To cope with these losses, first of all, we celebrate their life, the time we had with them and the time they had with us. That did happen. They were here with us for a while, time long or short, doesn't matter, but they were here. So why not celebrate? Why throw it all out and dethrone God and question God's actions? Let's just celebrate. On the other hand, we celebrate the opportunity that we were given to devote our love to them. We were given that opportunity to have them here with us, to devote our love to them. So why not celebrate? So their death, the death of loved ones, should cause both of us left behind and them who passed, to grow. It all forms of grief are growing pains. All forms of griefs are growing pains. All of them, growing pains. We all have to go through this at one point in our lives. That's what perfection, which is our final destination, is all about. Is perfection means I have experienced everything and anything possible. That includes watching death and dying. We will die ourselves and we will see other people dying. And we have to get to a point where when that happens, we do not display negative sentiments. It will take us time. We will have to live again and again and again and again to get to that point. But that's what perfection is all about, experiencing, living through everything and anything possible, death included, losses included. So these losses, they are lessons. They are lessons with the purpose of making us change our perspective on life as we know it. We have to change our perspective on life as we know it. And there's a tool that will make it happen: watching a loved one pass away, having to deal with the, I'm just going to say, aftermath. I'm not saying it's easy. It's never going to be easy. It's not. But we have to learn how to better deal with the situation. These losses will force us to seek alternative path. And that is what evolution is all about, finding alternative path to advance more and more. If every time I see a loved one pass away or go, and I revolt with the same type of intensity, with the same agony, with the same suffering, I'm not getting better. We will experience several people, several loved ones pass. Those are lessons for us. So we can create for ourselves the opportunity to reflect upon the situation in a more refined way than the last loss before this one. We have to refine our views on this. That's evolution. Seek alternative path, views towards these facts of life, because they will continue to happen. We cannot stop it. So, to wrap up, if we look ahead, and we imagine ourselves dealing with losses better than we do today, just imagine that one day we are going to deal with losses in a less stressful way. Just imagine that. It is possible because we see different people have different attitudes toward losses. Some people will suffer. Some people, when they lose a certain loved one, their life ends, stops, and they will live biologically for another 30 years, 50 years, but as a spirit, they're not living anymore in terms of learning, living in new experiences. They simply stop. So we can live up. We can live up for what we can be, and we should do this. Live up for what we can be instead of live up to what we are. We are better. We can be better. Jesus said that clearly. You can do, many more things, much more than what I did. So, living up for what we are, that's fine. But if we don't live up to what we can be, if we don't look ahead, we will not advance. Intellectually, morally, we are not using our experiences in our own favor. So when the next loved one passes, we are going to fall into the same situation. That's what I wanted to bring today about losses. We all have lost people. We will still lose some loved ones. It will still happen. And it's up to us to be more prepared. How do we get more prepared? Learning, studying, understanding what these processes are for me and for those who are passing, leaving. That's how we get better at it. Thank you very much for participating with us tonight. It was a pleasure being here again. And don't forget, every Wednesday, 7 p.m. Eastern Time, we are going to be here at Kardec Radio with Spiritism, A Closer Look. Thanks so much, and I'll see you next